Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by onlinegreatbooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas. I'm Scott Hambrick. There is Karl. Thank you for coming to the Online Great Books podcast. Thank you for listening to our little show. And before we get started, we're going to talk about Plutarch in just a moment. Please help us continue to do the show by going to onlinegreatbooks.com. And if we aren't enrolling, please go to Join Now and join the VIP waiting list, and we'll send you all kinds of white papers and resources that will help you read the great books or maybe start a great books group of your own. If we are enrolling, as a podcast listener, we would like for you to use the discount code OGB podcast, no spaces, to get 25% off your first 3 months when you sign up to read great books like works by Cicero and Aristotle and Aeschylus and Homer and a whole bunch more.
Yeah, and just so you know, you get the books. We send you the books.
Oh, that's true.
You're not just paying for a seminar. This is a concierge service for your mind.
If you're here, you probably have wanted to read these books if you haven't already. And we tried to design this onlinegreatbooks.com so that we took all the obstacles away. So we send you the best edition of each of these books we could find. The books, the titles themselves that we read, we believe are the best that we could find. It goes straight to your house. You get these reading goals and notifications to help keep you on track. We've got great seminar hosts. We're trying to make it easy for you. But there's enough plugging. We're going to read, or we did read, and maybe you should stop now and go find a copy of How a Man May Become Aware of His Progress in Virtue, an essay by Plutarch. You probably know Plutarch from his greatest hits, The Lives of Noble Grecians and Romans. That's how he's known mostly. Some people call that Plutarch's Lives. But our friend of the show, Brett McKay, said, Hambrick, y'all need to read this Plutarch's work here on virtue. And I had not read it before. I printed it out because I print everything out because I'm a peepaw, and mine was 15 pages. So this is a little 15-page deal.
It's short. The translation we have is a little cumbersome, but you can make your way through it. My first reaction to it was I was going to be annoying like Socrates and say, Plutarch, what is virtue?
I know.
So I had an argument with myself today.
Did you sting yourself like a torpedo fish?
I did. And I thought, why am I reading this? I want to go more into the meta level. I want to get to like metaphysics and stuff. I want to know what virtue is and talk about forms and do all this stuff that you get down in the depths of a Platonic dialogue. And then I had to argue with myself and say, come on. Which gives more value, the depths of the Republic or chicken soup for the soul?
Oh, no.
And I had to say, man, probably more people have been inspired in their daily life by a little cheerful story. And I think that's what Plutarch's giving. He's giving like chicken soup for the virtue. If that makes any sense, he's presuming that you already kind of want to be good. He's not doing any criticism on the notion of virtue in his society. It's like, this is what it is. If you already believe all that stuff, then here's some signs that you're doing all right.
When I read it, I was thinking the same thing. He doesn't get into any of the meta, like what is virtue. He just takes it for granted that virtue is some stuff, and we'll talk about what he might think it is. And it reads kind of like something out of the Boy Scouts of America handbook from 1939.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so the Boy Scouts show up and you sit around the campfire at the Boy Scout thing. You're not going to say, boys, what is virtue? Are you?
No, you want to tell them they want to be brave, thrifty, courteous, wise. I don't even know what all the Boy Scout.
Yeah. Yeah. And then perhaps later, you might say, well, what is virtue? Aristotle says somewhere in Nicomachean Ethics that if you don't have good habits, like this book is not for the young. He says Nicomachean Ethics is not for the young because they don't have the correct habits. They don't have that base level of, I guess, decency to be able to understand conversations about the higher level stuff. And I would say Plutarch is to get the basic level rather than to think about what virtue is or what justice is in a little bit deeper level. So I had to argue with myself and convince myself to like it.
You didn't like it?
I did at the end, but it took me some convincing. Sometimes I argue with myself.
Does that voice sound different than the one I hear?
Well, it says, are you sure you're not just full of shit?
Right.
Maybe, I'm a certain kind of a person, and I have to realize that I'm not necessarily, I don't know. This is too much about me. I'm not the intended reader. Maybe.
Well, hang on. Let me read the first paragraph.
Or you ever get lost in your head? You can read the first paragraph in a second, but I'm the kind of guy that might get lost in my head and actually screw up everything in my life because I'm stuck thinking about it.
You might get up in your head a little bit.
Yeah. So maybe Plutarch's the perfect guy for me.
I think he's worried about that. So this is a letter, and I'm going to mispronounce this guy's name. You're the Latin scholar. My friend Socius, Senecio,
Any of those would be fine.
My friend, is it possible, do you think, that all the arguments in the world can make a man sensibly assured that he is a proficient in virtue, upon the supposition that his proceedings do not in the least alleviate and abate his fallacy, but that the vice in him, weighing in equal a balance against his good inclination, holds him down, as heavy lead pulls down the yielding net? So the translation here is a little clunky, and Plutarch's probably a little highfalutin anyhow. How do you know that your vices and follies are in abatement and that your virtues are in the ascendancy? How do you know you're getting better?
Right. If you know all about something, if you know all about virtue, and you don't get any better, do you really know all about virtue?
I know my music theory pretty well. Like, actually, pretty darn well. But my guitar playing is terrible because I have no manual dexterity and I don't practice enough to do that, So now what?
So what good is it, right?
Yeah.
Are you a musician if you know all the names for the harmonies and how to modulate and do all that stuff, but you can't actually play anything?
I'm like Guitar George. I know all the chords.
Yeah, that's that's a good complaint. I've had this is a little bit of an inside story, but so I'm a Catholic and we have this thing called confession.
Get out.
Yeah. And so I occasionally go, and I remember I was talking to a priest once. He's like, he cut me down. He cut me like real good because I was talking in all sorts of theoretical detail about virtue and vice and everything. And he says, boy, you sure do know a lot about this, but you just won't quit doing it. You can get very theoretical and still not be able to do the thing.
Yeah, he wants us to do it. He talks about how musicians, grammarians, physicians, they get lots of feedback. They can't be imposters very long, but that vice isn't working against vice or towards virtue is a little harder to see the progress in. So he's written this, at least this is what I thought. He wrote this to come up with a series of tests that you can use to figure out how you're doing.
Right.
A self-evaluation. Kind
of a checklist. You should know, he thinks. If you're getting better, you should know. It shouldn't be a mystery. So apparently the Stoics thought that everybody who isn't perfectly virtuous is equally vicious.
Ugh.
And he doesn't think much of that. He thinks that there is a grade that you can tell that some people are better than others, or probably more fairly, you can tell that you yourself are getting better than you used to be.
Yeah, I think it's important that he thinks, in opposition to the Stoics, that you get better. Like, it takes time. It's sort of Aristotelian, right? You work into it, and it's practice and habituation and all that. And the Stoics are like, no, just, when your kids die, just don't cry.
Right. And I think this is reasonable. Let's say you do make some sort of moral resolution in your life. Is it going to be a 1 and a 0? You're going to flip the switch and all of a sudden everything is perfect? Well, probably not. I mean,
I want to know where that switch is.
Yeah. Probably you're going to be a little more kind, a little less of an ass. It might not be immediately evident.
You know what I just decided?
What's that?
I don't want to know where that switch is.
You don't want to flip and change completely?
No, and just be completely virtuous like that. Apparently, I hold some value in the doing and the becoming.
Mm-hmm.
Because I said that about flipping the switch, kind of going where the joke might have been, but then I thought, then almost instantly I was like, that's no good.
Imagine if you could do that. In what consists the character of a human being? Where's your personality? And if you were able to flip the perfection switch, would it still be you?
Right.
There needs to be some contiguity. I think it might have been David Hume brought up this example. If you take a ship and you replace, ships rot over time.
Yes. Is this Theseus's ship?
Is it? Yeah. So you replace one plank, then you replace another plank, then you replace that. I don't know ship parts, but that sail and that mast and at the end, like they have the USS Constitution is in the harbor in Boston, Old Ironsides, and well, how much of that is the original boat, ship? The Navy guys will be mad at me for calling it a boat. If you completely changed all at once, so the thing about the ship is there's contiguity. It's like, or your favorite band, how many original members are still in it? Well, but the one was in it while one of the original guys was in it, and then he was in it while the next original guy. So you can trace it back to the original thing. And so moral progress or progress in virtue is what humans who are going to stay the same person have to do. Otherwise, we just do a mind wipe and replace you with a different personality.
Oh, yuck.
Like completely rebuild the ship from scratch. Well, then it's not the same ship. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Or am I off on a tangent?
I think that's right. We still wanted to get meta, didn't we?
Yeah.
What does Plutarch tell us? You said you wrote down a list of 14 measures that we can use.
I jotted down a list of 14, and I probably missed some. But here's my first one. Your resolutions should be more firm and your application more intense than they were when you first set out. That's a good mark that you are getting more proficient. You're going to not care about the opinions of the masses. That's one of the later marks of proficiency. Okay. So, well, you decide today you're not going to care. Well, tomorrow you ought to not care even more.
Yeah.
You shouldn't go backwards and say, well, what are they saying on Twitter? It should be a continual progress. If you want to do it less, then you're probably going backwards.
Your habit becomes firmer.
Yeah. As you get better, he says, and I'm not sure I like this one, but proficiency, this is from Hesiod. Proficiency is when all difficulties are removed, all unevenness is smoothed and cleared, and the way made easy and passable. That's in paragraph 5. So if you get good at it, if you get good at being virtuous, whatever virtue is, it should be easier.
I think it's whack-a-mole.
Okay.
You can kind of beat back this problem or that problem, but it's problems all the way down. And for everything that you kind of conquer or master, you'll find that there's something else there. I don't think that I don't believe in a perfectibility.
Yeah. One of the things that bugs me about this account is I'm not so sure. See, I'm reading it and I want an example. And he gives a few examples. I mean, Socrates is an example of people who have done the thing that you want to do. So we're presuming we have an idea of what virtue is. And he names a few people. So Socrates is one. He names a bunch of ancient Greeks.
He uses Diogenes a lot, who's one of my favorite people.
Yeah.
He's awful.
Did I ever tell you what Frederick Copleston said about Diogenes?
No.
Okay, so this is a brief digression. Frederick Copleston wrote a series of books about philosophers. He was a Jesuit priest, had a famous debate with Bertrand Russell. You can find it on the internet somewhere. It's a useful place to go if you don't actually want to read stuff and you want to read about stuff.
Right.
So don't do it. Online Great Books, people. But he talks about Diogenes, and Diogenes used to do this thing in the public square to show his contempt for the public square.
Onanism.
Yes, that's a delicate way to put it. And Father Copleston said, Diogenes would do in the public square that which ought to only be done in private or perhaps not at all.
Yeah. Or perhaps not at all. Mincing.
Well, he might not have put the perhaps in. I'm doing this from memory. But I thought that was a marvelous example of euphemistic speech. You don't want to say the thing, but you want to say it without saying it. But I want an example. So did Diogenes, in his cynicism, did he get better at it? Did it get easier for him? If you asked him, what would he say?
Probably not. So the example he gives immediately after talking about this getting easier is Diogenes, who famously lived in an upturned barrel or jar or something, was materially very poor, saw a mouse nibbling at some scrap of his, and then thought, well, why do I need this good food? I could be like this mouse. And that's good enough because he lives well and is very glad of the scrap. And who must needs be a person of quality, forsooth, art extremely sorry and out of humor, because thou dost not feast upon down beds and canst not have the genteel privilege at this merry time to be drunk as well as others. So, if poverty and immaterialism is a virtue, then Diogenes was constantly seeking to get poorer. There's another story later on in this thing where he sees a little boy drinking out of the well with his hand, drinking out of the palm of his hand, and Diogenes throws his cup over his shoulder. It's like, I don't need this.
Yeah, so it seems like his example, Diogenes, doesn't follow his rule too. Or rather, once you remove a bunch of difficulties, things that didn't used to seem to be difficulties become difficulties. So if you are actually making moral progress or progress in virtue, you start seeing smaller things, right? If you have an old junker car, you don't care about the little dent on the fender. But if you start rebuilding it and making it shiny and new, right, then that bump is going to bother you a lot. That's my analogy. That if you make progress, when you're a complete mess, you don't care. You have bigger things to worry about. You have to make the engine work.
Anything's a win if you're a total mess.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know that's, well, I don't know. I don't know, Plutarch. My number 3, avocations are not frequent, and we rush back to the substantial rules and precepts of freedom. So I think avocations means things that break in upon you and call you to do other things. And so you're called for jury duty, or you have to take care of a family difficulty, and you don't get too wrapped up in it. You get it done. And when you're done, you go back to the substantial rules and precepts of wisdom. They should be a constant thing.
Yeah. That
your mind wants to devote itself to the higher things, and that the other stuff is a distraction.
When I read this little chunk, I thought of barbell training. You go on vacation, you get the flu, mom goes in the hospital, you can't train for a time, but as soon as the smoke clears, you're right back in there, squatting 3 times a week.
Right. And actually, both you and I do this. We both train people. That's how you know somebody's proficient at barbell training. That's one of the marks, is that. So for a new trainee, somebody who's in his first 3 months, I don't want him to miss ever, because he's training his virtue by showing up 3 times a week. If he has anything short of galloping pneumonia or violent diarrhea, he should probably train. Especially if he trains at home, he should go out and he should get under the bar and at least warm up. He's got to do the work, because he's got to build the habit. Okay. When he's got it, when he's made progress, I very rarely miss training days, but you don't need to worry if I had to miss training days. At least in this aspect of my life, this is something that I do. And the first thing I'm going to do when I get back from the vacation is go out to the gym. There's no concern about that. Whereas a new person who has not got the habits or the virtues of barbell training in, they go away for a vacation. They might never come back.
Yep.
That happens all the time. It seems to me that that's a good analogy for other aspects of your life. If you're starting to make yourself devoted to better things rather than lower things. Lower things might pop in, but you're going to want to be done with them.
Yep.
Go back.
And they don't cause you to backslide. And
it probably makes you lousy at parties, looking for the exit.
That's me.
I have number 4. It may seem, this is in paragraph 6, it may seem to you a very good argument of a proficient if you find yourself indifferent and unconcerned in that point. So if you hear about what he means by in that point, if you find out that somebody is living splendidly at court, has married great fortunes, or appeared publicly at the head of a great many freeholders, you don't care. You utterly to despise what is admired abroad is a certain sign of true and solemn wisdom and resolution. So what everyone else cares about, this shouldn't really matter. And we're starting to get an idea what he means by virtue, right?
It has big implications now because everything now, not everything, so many things now are normative.
Yeah.
Right? Well, we might as well decriminalize cannabis because everybody's doing it anyway.
Yeah. If everybody's doing it, it must be good.
Plutarch would say, you best not.
Well, it wouldn't matter if everybody was doing it. If everyone's doing it, that's just what everyone does. But you're not going to be part of everyone if you're proficient in virtue.
Yeah, you're right. He actually talks about the things that people esteem. It's not actually talking about actual behaviors or choices. It's just the things they hold in esteem you should stay away from. So
take a tour through your Instagram feed. Or don't, actually.
Yeah, don't.
Just don't. Go read a book. But if you did, or I had to take a car in to get worked on, and I had to sit at the dealer while they did it, and they always have the TV on.
Oh, it's so gross.
And it's always the network news shows that they run in the morning. I always go in the morning. And it's little 30 seconds of some celebrity. And what the heck is a celebrity? Somebody who's famous for...
Someone who is celebrated.
But for what?
I don't know. Being celebrated?
Yeah. And I'm supposed to esteem that. I'm supposed to watch it and say, gosh, I wonder what Deborah Norville's doing. That was one of the big stories on while I was sitting there. Apparently, she used to be a big deal, and then she lost her job and her show, and then she got it back. And I'm supposed to cheer for her that she's got back her minor celebrity status again. Good for you, Deborah.
On A Current Affair or whatever.
Yeah. I have nothing against Deborah Norville, but I don't really care. You know?
Indifference is the opposite of love, Karl.
I don't think that's true.
Oh, you think hate is?
Yeah. Boy, that's a dangerous thought, right? If you're going to say indifference is the opposite of love, then if I propose something and you don't love it, you're an enemy.
When you tell me, let's go get burgers, and I say,
Yeah, you're an enemy
it's
now.
On. I hate your burgers, Karl. Ah.
Well, fine. Let's go get tacos then.
Well, I think in terms of romance, that's probably true, though, right?
Well, yeah. Yeah.
I hated him at first. I met him at a party. I hated him at first, and then blah, blah, blah. And we've been married 22 years now, she'll say. But if they're indifferent, ooh, boy, that's almost the friend zone.
Yeah, there's a little boy at church that does crazy things to get my daughter's attention. It's because he likes you. No. Yeah, it is. That's what boys do. No. He wants you not to be indifferent.
That's right.
It'd be better if you hate him, because you can move from to love from there, but you can't go from indifference.
It's tough.
Which, hey, that's a clue to Plutarch. Okay, so let's say you're right. Indifference really is the opposite of love in the realm of eros or romance. Or I think in politics, that's a terrible statement. But I could see where it could mean something. So if you are indifferent, you're free. This is starting to get us some shape of what virtue is.
Well, the Stoics want to be indifferent.
Yeah, but for what purpose?
They just want that emotional detachment. They don't want anything to have a hold of them. Or if you're from Rogers County, a hold of them.
Yeah, I don't think Plutarch is well, I don't think that's him. There's somewhere in this, perhaps you've got the reference, where he talks about that virtue ought to take some action. You serve in your city or something, that this is a mark of being proficient, that you actually do stuff. So it's not so that you sit in an ivory tower and don't do anything. You actually do the good, but you don't care about all the other stuff.
Virtue without works is dead.
You have to do something. So let me see where I found that. Somewhere in end of paragraph 8, they are also engaging pleasures, disputing hard questions, examining precedents, pleading causes, and so undertaking some magistracy or public office, giving thereby demonstration of their opinions and resolution, that this is something that you should be doing.
Establishing a resolution by exercise.
Yeah,
Yep.
so it's not enough just to think about it. You have to do it, and you probably have to do it in public.
That piece Aristotelian, you have to do it.
Let's see. My number 6 is, or my number 5. We're on number 5. This is in paragraph 7. Perceive that you have utterly expelled all emulation, jealousy, and everything else that uses or used to disturb or discourage young men. You may then assuredly conclude with yourself that you've made very laudable progress. So you don't want to copy everybody else. You're not jealous of what they do.
Yeah, he doesn't like emulation. You have to become your individual. This is self-actualization here, probably.
So we've got a bunch of social media now, right now, that people are very concerned if somebody says bad things about you. I think Plutarchian virtue would be armor against that. You know that you've progressed in virtue if you don't care about any of that. And you're not trying to imitate somebody else, and you're not jealous of somebody else, and you're not going to go off and leave nasty comments. You're not even going to care what's going on. You know what the good thing is, and you do it, and you don't care what anybody thinks of you. Do you think I'm reading that correctly?
So are you cautioning people against commenting on YouTube? Is that what you... Or... Is that what that
what's
is?
the point of commenting on YouTube?
Yeah, I don't know.
What good does it do you? First a comment or some snarky little thing. Does it help you? Does it accomplish anything? Do you think if it's an actual person who's put a lot of work into making the content, do you think a snarky comment is going to help? It's not real action. It's fake action. It's action without any consequence, without any responsibility. You're not going in the public square and doing anything virtuous. You are pretending to do something.
As we do this on the internet isn't real. I don't care what bugmen say. It's not real. Reddit, Twitter, YouTube activism isn't really doing anything.
Mm-mm.
We were doing some Q&A stuff for Barbell Logic this morning. Reynolds and I, one of the other shows I do. Anytime I see a comment that starts out with IMHO, in my humble opinion, or FWIW for what it's worth, or so, comma, I just delete it because it's just going to be bullshit.
So what you're saying is,
I'm going to build a straw man and then poop on that. And then the other ones are, somebody giving me their opinion we didn't ask for. We produce some content that we hope some people enjoy, and if other people don't enjoy it, then they should go do something else they do enjoy. But they do that. It feels like action, but it's no risk. When it doesn't work, there's no consequence for it not working. Just a big zero.
Yeah.
And he actually talks about your writing style changing as a result of this too.
Oh, yeah.
That's related.
That's my number 6, is alteration of your style of writing and your way of managing any argument or discourse. So how is it that we change? What is it that people do? So you give some description. Let's see. Some few of them there are who, like silly larks, are taken with the glaring light of natural philosophy, measuring themselves by their own levity conceit, think they're presently able to attain the height of that science. Others, like young whelps, from Plato, love to snap and bite at one another, only to gratify a contentious, skeptical, and sophistical humor, which they at first got by bad tuition and ill-managed studies. This is YouTube comments or Facebook comments or Twitter comments. You know, it's a... Let me just throw out this little snap or bite at you, and I'm not going to stick around to actually engage with you. I just want to score a point. Or find you in some supposed contradiction or whatever. This is what got Socrates in trouble. This is what he says in the Apology, that there were people who followed him around and all they learned was the contradiction. They didn't learn that they're supposed to seek truth. And so they would go to their elders and point out all their contradictions, but never actually want to find out what justice is, for example. It's very frustrating. It's like, can you tell I'm frustrated?
Yeah.
It's like meme wars.
Now, wait a minute.
Bad memes, not our memes, which are the best memes.
Memes are good. Memes are effective means of communication.
Oh, but some of them are so bad.
But some of them are so good.
Well, you can just take it that I only mean the bad memes.
Oh, I see. Okay.
When I complain about them. So when you get better at philosophy, your style of speaking and writing will change. You won't be one of those jerks.
He tells a little story in here about writing and discourse about Antiphanes, who I don't know anything about. He said, Antiphanes said merrily that in a certain city the cold was so intense that words were congealed as soon as spoken, that after some time they thawed and became audible, so that the words spoken in winter were articulated next summer. Even so, the many excellent precepts of Plato, which he instilled into the tender ears of his scholars, were scarce perceived and distinguished by many of them till they grew men and attained the warm, vigorous summer of their age. It's pretty awesome.
Are you in the warm, vigorous summer of your age?
I don't know. Are you a master coach, Karl?
I'm trying to be.
Do I have to teach the power clean to be a master coach?
You ought to know how to do it. Whether you do it is up to the demands of your client. I think you probably ought to know how to do it.
But this is back to the thing about Aristotle and the Nicomachean Ethics, where he says, the philosophy, you really can't teach it to somebody until they're 30. He says that the words, so this little story says to me that the young person may hear the words, but until their soul and heart is warmed by the vigorous summer of maturity, they can recollect those words they heard earlier and then appreciate them and take them to heart. Yeah,
this is the line that I have heard attributed to Mark Twain.
Then you become the master philosopher.
But if you do, let's say, the thing is, as you get better at serious endeavors, you don't stop wanting to get more better. And so that's the reluctance to say, that maybe if you join a guild, you can be a master plumber. There's objective criteria. Yeah, I can do this. Okay. In a more open-ended pursuit, like statesmanship or barbell coaching, how do you ever know? I mean statesmanship in the Platonic sense, like you're actually concerned with the good of the country. How do you know when you're good enough? Or marriage, for that matter. There's not, I fulfilled all the check marks, I guess I'm good. No, you fulfill all the check marks and you say, how could I be better?
I'm a passing good husband.
You just barely pass.
Right.
It always makes you want to do more, which I think is one of Plutarch's marks. My number 7, I think, go backwards a little bit, is in paragraph 9, an evenness and mildness of temper in all such affairs, which will never suffer us to enter the lists with vehemency and passion, nor to be hot and concerned in settling an argument, nor to scold and give bad words when we have vanquished our adversary, nor to be very much dejected if we chance to be quite baffled, is, I think, a true sign of a great proficient in virtue. That sentence probably reads a lot better in Greek.
Gosh, I hope so.
It's like Cicero. It's a periodic, like the verb is at the end.
Right.
You don't know what he's talking about till you get to the end.
I love the part about nor to be hot and concerned in settling an argument. I don't like this crap when somebody says, we'll just have to agree to disagree.
Mm-hmm.
But to get some ease with not getting to the bottom of something right now, I think is ultimately a good sign.
Right. There's limits to what you can accomplish in discourse anyway. Life is not an argument. This is a Karl precept.
Carlingian.
Life is not an argument. It doesn't matter if you win, necessarily. Marcel said somewhere, it can be better to lose an argument and gain the person. I mean, what's the payoff? I was talking with a friend last night. We were talking about a bunch of other things, and then he was getting ready to go home, and he made some mention about, well, I guess now I got to go figure out what's going on in politics. No, you don't.
No, please don't.
No, you don't. No, it's just going to make you upset. I know him. I know it's going to bother him. And there's nothing he can do about it. But he can do a whole lot about his own life and getting the things better that he can get better. And worrying about, what's going on at the federal level. It's a distraction.
Politics is a little like professional sports or wrestling at this point.
Yeah.
If professional wrestlers could throw you in jail. It's like that.
Hulk Hogan comes out. Listen,
right, brother. Coming with me.
Yeah. Professional wrestling with a police force. So I don't think Plutarch is saying that you shouldn't take action. That you shouldn't. He's already talked about taking action in your city, doing stuff. Okay? You're not supposed to just be an isolated atom of thinking, of virtuous thinking. But you don't need to take it so seriously.
He says you have to take action, and he defines action pretty narrowly there in that last paragraph of 8. He even says that, sophists don't necessarily learn stuff; they just teach things. So even the teaching is not good enough. Like, you have to actually do the thing and be changed by it. But don't be attached to the outcome.
Right.
You do it because the doing is good.
Right.
You do it because the doing is good.
Well, in the long run, we're all dead anyway.
No. Yep. Hank said nobody gets out alive.
We're just fighting the long defeat, as Tolkien said.
There, that sums it up. Karl says, quotes Tolkien, and I quote Hank Williams Sr.
I don't mean that to make you not do things, but you do what's right because it's right. You don't do what's right because you think you're going to make a difference.
Because what is going to get you?
Yeah. Because in the end, it might make a difference, it might not. You still have to do it. And if you fail, you get in an internet fight and you don't manage to convince that person. So what? Or politics doesn't go your way, your preferred candidate doesn't win. You still have to live your life.
Yeah.
You have things that you need to worry about. They always talk about the demographic pyramid. It should be wider at the base and smaller at the top. You should have more young people. You get that flipped over and you're in trouble. I think if you start worrying more about politics and less about what's going on in your house, you've got your pyramid flipped over.
Yeah. The household is the fundamental political unit, right?
Yes, I believe so.
For Aristotle and Hambrick.
And for Shoot.
More Carlingian. Karl, the next to the last paragraph of section 9, I think you've got the same thing I've got.
Yeah.
He says something about Homer here. He said, Homer, he was so blinded with an overconfidence of his abilities in poetry that he has slipped a false quantity and left it on record in the very first verse of his Iliads. And I wrote, what? What is he talking about? Do you know what that was?
I don't know exactly what he's referring to. I bet he's got it wrong. So I have my question mark, exclamation point there. My general rule is when people say Homer got something wrong, is to say, nuh-uh. I'm very convinced of the genius of Homer. But Plutarch is writing where? 200 AD, 250?
Yeah. 1,000 years
This
later.
is 1,000 years later. The language has changed. So vowel quantities that worked for Homer might not work in Koine Greek, which would be what Plutarch, well, he might have been trying to write in Attic. That's the limits of my Greek knowledge. So I don't know. Even Homer nods, isn't that an expression? But what's the point of that paragraph? That you might make a mistake. You might be wrong. We might screw something up in the podcast, right? But don't be afraid of it, and don't let it make you not do anything.
The learnedest men and greatest artists have failed and may fail for want of caution or confidence. It ought more nearly to concern those that earnestly follow virtue, not to slip the least opportunity of improvement, either by company or otherwise, etc. We can't let fear of making an error or whatever prevent us from doing the show, which I think is ultimately good and leaves the woodpile taller than we found it. Hey, listen, if Homer screwed up that first line, or how about this? If Plutarch messed up that line about Homer, I'll be all right doing the show.
Right. That's one of the things we find with people coming to us at Online Great Books is they're worried about reading it wrong.
Yeah.
They're worried about being wrong. If you're so worried about being wrong that you never take any steps, then you're never going to be right. A Hambrickian precept. I'm speaking from what I've heard from the great Scott Hambrick. Young'uns ought to get married. Okay.
Yes.
Well, why don't they? Because they're afraid of making a mistake.
Because their parents done screwed up.
Yeah, there's all sorts of reasons. And well, yeah, but let me tell you, you're going to make a mistake.
Yep.
You're going to make lots of mistakes. And if you let that prevent you from doing good things, you're never going to do anything. Nobody ever is guaranteed 100% perfection. Maybe it's 51.
That'd be good. I'll take that.
That you're hoping for. Or even, it might even be 20. But if you're catching the tails, right? If you get 5% on your investments, but it's the good 5%.
What?
If you get, Taleb talks about this. Like, if you fail on many of your choices, but you succeed on the ones that have the biggest payoff.
Okay.
Then we don't care that you miss on most of them because you've won on the big one.
Yeah, you don't care that you lost a whole bunch as long as your yield of your entire portfolio is 5 points.
Yeah.
And you won when it mattered.
And that'll be the last time I ever talk about finance. It's out of my comfort zone. See, because I'm afraid of making a mistake. I like number 8, at least my number 8, another sign of a proficient in virtue. This is in, where is this? Paragraph 10. Is when the proficient has given anything to his friend or done any kindness for anyone, he keeps it to himself and does not blab it to anybody. That's what the translation says, blab.
Give your alms in private. Do not boast of your virtues.
Do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. That's not Plutarch, that's Jesus.
Right below this, I wrote a note here because I ran into a friend of mine. You'll like this, Karl.
Yes.
I hadn't seen him in about 10 years. And I wrote his number down. His name is Possum. And so he's like, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm reading Plutarch. And he said, that's about right. Possum. He's a fine guy. Owns a little trucking company. He's doing just fine.
Yeah.
You know why they call him Possum?
No, I don't. Why do they call him Possum?
Some guys jumped him when he was a teenager and undertook to whoop him. And he laid there dead like a possum. And when they turned it back on he beat them all down with a folding chair. So he's in his mid-40s now, and he's Possum.
And he'll be Possum till the day he dies.
Yep.
You can't get a new... Yeah, that was an essence-revealing event in his life.
That's right.
Right. He revealed his true name. Right after that part in 8 was an image that I really like. The paragraph that starts, to borrow a simile from husbandmen. And I'm honestly not sure exactly how it relates to the previous paragraph, but I like it so much. It's about if a stalk of corn that once it, and by corn means wheat. They didn't have corn. They didn't have maize.
Any grain at that time, yeah.
Yeah. So when it is in immature grain, it will stand straight up. When it is ready for harvest, it starts to bend down. So when you are young and empty-headed, you're like the young wheat. So those that are most empty-headed and have least firmest in solidity have always the greatest share of confidence, formality, and stiffness in their address, look biggest, walk with the most state, and top upon and condemn others with the highest arrogance and severity of any living. Okay, so that is when you're young, you don't know anything. You stand up very proud. But when once their brains begin to fill and become well poised with solid notions, they look down into themselves, like the stock, and quite lay aside that insolent and arrogant humor which is proper only to youngsters. So once you start to make progress, this could be another sign of virtue, you become less proud.
More navel-gazing?
Well, navel-gazing is kind of pejorative, but more inward-directed. You start turning your satire and invective upon yourself rather than on other people. You want to be a heavy stalk of wheat rather than, immature. You don't want to be the tallest stalk of wheat.
I love this corn thing because every now and then you'll hear somebody talk about barley corn. We still have that corn for any cereal.
Mm-hmm.
That sticks around in our language.
Yeah.
Had to go look that up in the OED.
The stuff that we call corn isn't corn. It's the thing that grows here.
Yeah.
And they didn't have a word for it, so they called it by an old world word.
And so now it's corn.
Yep. Because, words change their meaning.
I underlined a thing here. I like his thing about he doesn't really talk about the grain being full and plump and heavy. But that's why it is. That's why it's stooped over. But he says, toward the top of the nutrimentive particles vibrate and palpitate as they were quite spent with the length of their journey. And thereupon, you see, they form themselves many small, weak, and tender joints, as so many supports and breathing places. The nutrimentive particles vibrate and palpitate. I like their old-timey biology and physics and stuff we get to see in some of these things.
Well, when you walk in the field and you think of things, palpitating.
It's breathing.
Yeah. Yeah. He follows up on this thought. I like the sequence of the people at the academy, of the students. So this is right at the end of paragraph 10. Those that went to the school of Athens were first of all sophoi, wise, next philosophoi, lovers of wisdom, then orators, and last, in the course of time, plain common men. I love that. For the longer they applied themselves to study and philosophy, so much more all vanity, pride, and pedantry abated in them, and the nearer they came to plain, downright, honest men. I love that. I want it on a t-shirt. You start off knowing everything. Then you start off loving the idea of knowing everything. Then maybe you learn how to speak about things, but in the end, when you finally attain some degree of wisdom or make progress, then you're probably more like Possum. Right?
Oh, he's a philosopher.
But in other words, to be a downright honest man, you need to get rid of the arrogance of the schools. I thought that was an interesting thought. I wonder why you can't just start out as a plain, downright honest man. Why do you have to go through the process?
Because you have to know, to be honest, you have to know what's there so that you can speak the truth of it. It takes a great deal of introspection probably to be honest.
Okay, so you can't just start off because you don't know anything.
I think so.
I can buy that.
Like you can't speak honestly about the thing you know nothing of, unless you're Socrates and you say you don't know anything.
It's not quite what he says. The difference is that when I do not know, neither do I think that I know. He says he knows some stuff. In Symposium, he says he knows all about love.
He knows the most.
He's an expert on love.
Alcibiades.
Let's see. My precept number 9, he examines his own failings with the greatest severity. So you don't, when you become proficient, you're looking at your own failings.
Yeah.
You turn more inward like that stalk that's bending down.
And impartially blames or corrects himself.
Ooh, that's a good point to make. Back to barbell training, I have a couple of clients that have some food issues. What will happen is they'll do really well for a while, and then they'll screw up. I don't even want to say screw up because that's feeding into it.
Feeding.
I know, but then they'll write something like, "Oh, everything went to hell. I was terrible. I don't know why I can't do this. I'm terrible. I have no self-control." And so they're not impartially judging themselves.
Right.
They're catastrophizing, as Becca Saigon would say. And they're making things worse by thinking them so. That's not I don't think that's the correct way. Say, no, I had too much at that meal. That's it.
Yep.
I can fix that. You can't fix I'm a complete disaster. Which might be one of the temptations of doing it. Why you want to do it is if you think of yourself as a complete disaster, it takes away the responsibility of fixing the next meal. So be impartial. Number 10 that I have is from Piron and Bion. This is right before the paragraph 12. It's a good precept that you could endure a reproof from anybody with the same indifferency and unconcertedness as they could hear the highest encomiums. And then he quotes a poetic thing. So if somebody says something bad about you, it should be about the same as when somebody says something good about you. That you have to endure the bad thing, and you have to endure the good thing too.
Yep.
You have to have apathy in a good way.
Or is he saying that criticism is as good as acclaim? From a good critic, there should be helpful information in there that's valuable to you. They're both feedback. Way to go, virtuous, you helped the old lady cross the street.
Mm-hmm.
Or, man, you're a dick, you never helped the old ladies across the street. It's all behavioralism.
Well, I think in this passage, given that he talks a little bit later about having apathy and unconcernedness in all accidents, you shouldn't necessarily care. However, there's a little bit of a conflict that I saw in this, because in some places he says you shouldn't emulate and you shouldn't care what other people say. And then he says later that when there are people that you should emulate, that when there are people advanced in virtue, you should desire to emulate. So I don't think he's going the full Stoic.
The full Stoic. Never go full Stoic.
That there are certain people that you really shouldn't care what they say.
Agreed.
I think that, for me, that's the thread that's running through all of this, that you'll know that you've advanced in whatever it is that he thinks virtue is when you don't care. What if Plutarch had a YouTube channel?
He would be demonetized.
He would, but so what Plutarch did in the famous book is he would do comparisons of lives. So he'd do typically a Greek life and a Roman life, and talk about their character and explain one by reference to the other. And so it's all a bunch of moral exhortation mixed with history. I think they're great fun. One of my favorite lines is about the musician he was a young man who was as good a musician as was appropriate for a gentleman to be.
Right.
Because to get really good at music, you have to neglect everything else. I thought that was a good line. That's the sort of things you get from Plutarch. Maybe he did it as a YouTube channel. And what would you have? You'd have little people. Here's Plutarch doing all the work and the research to put together this content and present it. And then a little person would write in, I don't know, LOL, another ancient Greek.
Right.
And think that he'd done something. And the worst thing would be if for Plutarch to sit there at his YouTube creator studio and say, oh my gosh, I got a bad comment. That would be a mark of not having the right kind of virtue. You do the things that you think are good, people are going to crap all over it.
Is it not virtuous for me to write 3 blog posts at scotthambrick.com about a guy that thinks that problematicism is a awesome word in an entirely new category?
Well, did it bother you?
No.
if it's an occasion to produce something, I think that's fine. I think that's good.
Good. I'm glad that, okay, Karl says it's fine.
If you were going to get in an internet pissing match with somebody.
Yeah. You know, there's the old saying, like, you don't pick a fight with somebody who buys ink by the barrel.
Yeah.
Don't pick fights with people who have 4 podcasts and a blog, and don't do that. Don't do that. It's not good.
Oh, just let it go. Let him go.
No, it's fine. No, it is. It's fine. But it was an opportunity to create content and make my point further. Yeah. Let's do 4 more. The next one, to me, we'll see if you say it's the next one. Your dreams, what you dream is evidence of progress and virtue. Did you have that one down?
Mm-hmm. I have that one as a sub-precept.
Oh.
Because I was looking for where he says sign of proficiency, and he doesn't. I don't know that he actually says it about dreams, but he says, and I don't know that I don't know. If you're good and virtuous, you should have calm dreams. I don't know that that's true.
Yeah, I don't know that that's true either.
Dreams can get pretty crazy. In fact, if I take fish oil, my dreams get crazy.
What?
Has it affected my virtue?
I need examples.
Oh, I can't remember them.
Or do you choose to not?
I choose not to remember. I don't usually dream, but I've been taking the fish oil to try to get everything in order for nationals.
You're like Rogan. Bro, do you try fish oil? So when we do the shoot-a-palooza here with the handbrakes and the shoots on at the end of the year, can I feed you fish oil?
Can you feed it to me?
Yeah. And then will you give us a full report on your dreams?
Sure. I'll keep a notebook by the bed so I can wake up. Yeah. I usually don't have any, and then whenever I take that stuff, I do.
That's really odd. Yeah, I don't want to use the content of my dreams as a measure of my waking virtue. Don't think that's a good idea.
No, usually my dreams are usually a reflection of things that I'm worried about. So I guess if I were less worried, I wouldn't have them. When I was playing a lot of chess, I would dream about chess. When I played a lot of trumpet, I would dream about playing trumpet. You know, when I was dealing with professional organizations, I would dream about that.
That sounds awful.
So maybe I'm not very virtuous. But you take what you did in the day, and then it goes into the night. So I don't know about that one.
Yeah.
I have a number 11. An especial sign of true proficiency is to love and affect their way of life, whose actions we emulate. And upon account of an honorable opinion, we always entertain for them to do as they do. So if you have examples of good people that you want to love their way of life, you want to try to imitate their way of life. So, what would Socrates do? What would Aristides do? I think Aristides was there was some politician in Athens who, when they did the accounts, they found that he didn't take any money from his political office, and it was a big shock because everybody did. It's like when Cicero was governor of Sicily, and he came home not rich.
Yeah.
You're supposed to come home rich. That's what people do. But he was apparently honest. My number 12 is to have an affection for virtue in its most mournful dress. That's 15. And this seems to me straight out of the end of the Republic, or the whole Republic, which is, the just life ought to be good enough that you should love it, even if it doesn't make you any money, even if everybody hates you for it. And this is the big challenge of Platonism, I think.
If it's virtuous, can you make much money?
I'd like to make money. Let's say you didn't. Let's say you go into politics in your city. And I think that guy was Aristides, but I might have the name wrong. So you go into politics in your city, and you have 2 choices. You can be crooked and get really, really rich and, help your friends and harm your enemies. Or you can do your job as the law says you should do it, and you can go home not rich and not having helped out your friends and having everybody mad at you. This is the dilemma in Book 2 of the Republic. Which one is better? To be good or to be bad? Bad seems to make you more money. Plutarch thinks that you ought to be good.
And Diogenes too. You be good and have enough.
To be good and have enough?
Yeah.
What if that's not possible?
I don't know. I think underlying all of this is that it is possible. An assumption that it's possible.
So you think Plutarch thinks that if you follow his rules, you'll actually be a success?
I don't know about that. You'll have enough. Is that a success?
It can be. Yeah, I would say so.
Like if it's virtuous, it should lead to human thriving, fulfillment, support, humanness, which means some food and some shelter and, the things that we need.
So this is why back at the beginning, I compared it to Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Yeah.
You've seen those books, right?
Yeah.
They've been around for a while.
It's gross.
I used to read Reader's Digest when I was a kid. They'd have similar little moral...
Laughter, the best medicine.
Right. In a reasonably stable society, it probably does do pretty well. If you follow the rules, if you are conventionally virtuous, it's probably going to pay off.
Yeah.
What if it doesn't? Does that change what virtue is?
Your questions, you're stinging me. I guess I have a sort of a utilitarian conception of this, like that virtuous stuff works for people. It's not just something you do so that you are in a particular state, but it's that which leads up to everything else that you need to be human. And, being human means you have rationality, you have physical needs, you have emotional and relational needs and all of that stuff. And this should support all of those things. I could be wrong.
I think for the most part you're right, but there are the limit cases. There's the exceptions. And they're troublesome. And maybe I should just get over it and not worry about it. Priam of Troy.
Okay.
So he leads a virtuous life, I guess, and he's rich and successful and has 50 wives and a bunch of kids, and he screws up one time with Paris, and it all comes crashing down. And so did he have a happy life? That's one kind of an example. There's the role of chance. Chance can bring it all crashing down. Then
fate.
Yeah, or it could be, I'm of the opinion that cultures and states and nations can go wrong on a big scale. And if they do, does it change this? If you lived in, let's say you lived in Germany in 1938, is it going to be enough just to practice conventional virtue?
So what you're saying is...
it sounds like you're about to get problematic.
Is the implication of what you said there is that the state drives the culture or the culture drives the state?
Oh, the culture probably drives the state. Politics is downstream from culture, somebody famous once said. But I don't know that it matters for my question. Let's say that it has been driven downstream, okay, into the sewer.
Okay.
And that there's something wrong. If you follow all the conventional rules of virtue, it might make you not prosperous.
Well, that's only if virtue is just strictly normative. Like if it's an absolute thing, it doesn't matter what the state does. It doesn't matter what the nation does. It's interesting how you and I have a state and nation distinction. Yeah, if it's not normative, then it won't necessarily lead to material flourishing then.
Yeah, so I think the precept, for me, it was precept 12, have affection for virtue in its most mournful dress. So even when it doesn't work out for people, you're supposed to esteem it. I think that kind of doesn't match with the rest of them. The general, I thought that virtue is going to make you do well, runs up against some examples where it didn't make them do well.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a guarantee. If the goal is simply to do well, as defined in whatever society you're in, then virtue becomes flexible. And maybe we shouldn't praise the mournful dress, and maybe we should say, Socrates, you should have just gotten with the program. You didn't have to take poison. You didn't have to make that stand.
But for Hambrick and probably for Shoot, virtue is a constant thing and is isolated from state or nation. You do it no matter what that gets you in your current environs. Yes?
Yeah, I think so. So if we had to sketch out, I had 2 more precepts, but they're short. You shouldn't care when famous people come to visit, and you should esteem a little fault like a big one. That was my 13 and 14. But if we wanted to sketch out the whole thing of what Plutarch thinks a good person looks like, what would it be like?
Introspective, ruthless with their self-examination, intolerant of fault in themselves, isolated or insulated from public opinion or the vicissitudes of culture, and pretty tireless in all of that work. How's that for a summary?
That's good. That's good. It leaves a gap for me, though, because these are all things that you shouldn't do.
Right.
I want to know what you should do.
Yeah. What should you do? He doesn't make a lot of positive injunctions, does he?
No.
Does he make any? Where are they? I don't know.
What must I do to be good? Well, don't break the negative commandments. Okay, but what should I do to be good? For me, that's why, to bring in other books, that's why Plato's got the whole cave thing where you go up to the vision of the good. That's why we've got, it's either book 9 or 10 in Nicomachean Ethics about contemplation. What's a human for? What is the good life? This is how not to screw up the good life, I think. Don't care too much about what other people think. You know, all that stuff you said is how not to screw up the good life. But what exactly the good life is, I'm not so sure yet from Plutarch.
Are these Romans not that interested in like the teleology thing?
Well, Plutarch was Greek, but writing in Roman times, so that works. Yeah. But they didn't seem to do that much.
Yeah, I think it's important. It's important for me. You know, what are we suited for? What do we do?
Yeah, so when you look at ancient Greece and ancient Rome, which are our 2 big poles when we look at the ancient world, well, at least 5th century Athens, they worried a lot about this stuff. In Rome, they worried about the sewers. You had running water in Rome. You had aqueducts. You had millions of unnamed people leading prosperous lives in the peace that Rome accomplished in 200 years. But what Rome didn't do very much, at least not like the Greeks did, was sit around and think, what's it all for?
Yeah. Their art is not as lovely. Maybe their verse is, but, you know, their statuary and stuff is derivative.
Virgil's pretty good.
Virgil's pretty good. Livy's pretty good. But their art's not as original, not as lovely.
Well, I want to go back to my chicken soup thing. You know, the Romans would be chicken soup for the soul. The Greeks would be, what's it all about, man? And, well, which one would you rather, whose house would you rather visit?
Right.
That was why I had to argue with myself about why I ought to like Plutarch. Because I want to say, what's it all about? But in the meantime, you have to live your life. You have to do some practical things.
And not everybody wants to go dig in on all that stuff. Not everybody has the time to do all that stuff. Some people have to be blacksmiths and husbandmen and all these other things. They don't have time for that.
Well, and if at the end of the line, like that one thing about the academy, at the end of the line you become a plain, common, honest man, maybe if you're a plain, common, honest man, you could just start there.
Yeah.
As long as there's not things pulling you out of that. As long as the wherever you live isn't spinning out of control. I don't know. I liked it. I had to convince myself to like it, but I liked it.
I liked it, but boy, that translation is a bumpy dude. And I spent quite a bit of time looking for a good translation, and clearly didn't find one. And I don't even know who did this thing. This is one of these sort of, I don't know, one of these things that you find on the internet that suck.
Well, if you out there have some knowledge of Greek, I would like to dig up the Greek text. Maybe here's room for you to make a little mark.
Yep.
And do a decent translation of Plutarch on how to know you're making progress in virtue.
Did you hear about Project Gutenberg?
Yeah, I did.
Project Gutenberg, I think, is one of the most glorious things that have come out of the last, maybe, gosh, it's probably been around 30 years now.
Started in the 70s.
Oh, there you go.
The first book that they digitized and put on the primordial internet was the Declaration of Independence.
There you go. Yeah, they created the ebook, and it's free, and all of this stuff that's out of, not all this stuff, but so much stuff that's out of copyright is available there at no charge to anyone, and their CEO has said that they would remove some things that they found unsuitable. I mean, that's a virtual book burning. There was quite a bit of outrage about that last week, and he walked that back. Gregory Newby is his name, and he walked that back. But if there are any books you guys love, go get a hard copy of that thing. If there's a Gutenberg book that you think is important, download that thing and put it on your private machine. And let's keep the lights on, guys, because some of these people aren't going to help us do that.
Yeah. Archive.org. I'll give a unsolicited plug to them. They've got a whole bunch of PDFs that you can download of out of copyright books. That's where I found some Theodore Roosevelt. I got a bunch of Nietzsche from them. I actually have... I've got Rules for Radicals downloaded. We're going to read that one of these days.
Yeah.
I think Gulag Archipelago's on there. If you want to read the entire version, you could get that, all 3 volumes. You find what's out there and put it wherever you keep your safe stuff. Yeah,
the illusion that information is free and will always be, and it's going to proliferate, will already poison the well, is an illusion. We could lose it, guys. Acid-free paper and hard copy stuff is pretty darn good. If you got some books that you want your grandkids to have, get some good copies and set on them like a mother hen. Let them hatch those ideas out in your kids.
Yeah.
That's a big, long show about Plutarch. Thanks for listening. If you stayed with us this long, you're one of our favorites. Thank you for doing that. Email us if you get any questions or complaints about it even. You can email us to support@onlinegreatbooks.com. And if you have any questions about our program, you can send those there as well. And remember, when enrollment's open, you can use that coupon code OGB Podcast, and you'll get 25% off your first 3 months. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you.